Who the fuck are you to judge me and what I did to my life? Why are you the ruler in which all is measured by? You know?
Yeah.
And it's just stuff like that. I don't feel lost by not having a religion or anything like that, because you'd have people who are just like, you know, well, if you don't believe in it, what's the point? Is that and the other? I say, because the universe fascinates me more so than any religious text, or, you know, even the reason for why we're here. It pales in comparison to like how the fucking universe works. You know, nebulas, galaxies, all these things. You look up to the sky and there's 1,000 questions, millions of questions that need answering there that are way more interesting to me than what somebody wrote down in the book a few thousand years ago.
Hello everybody, Magic Skeptic here, aka Magic Dara, and you're all most welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. And this is a very special episode indeed, because Sgt Ducky himself is joining me here today. Ducky, you are most welcome. It's an enormous privilege to have you on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, lad. Happy to be here.
Can you believe it's actually been a year since we last spoke? So when we booted up the old man, when I booted up Discord and I had a look at the chat, it was a year ago. By the time this goes up, it will have been over a year. It'll have been like a year and 5 days and some change, something like that. But it's been a year since we did the previous podcast.
Yeah, we're a very important menu, you see. Hard to get a hold of.
Actually, you should know, because in the intervening year, I have been plagued with comments from subscribers. Plagued is a negative word. I should say, I should use another word. I've been inundated with comments asking when I'm going to have you on my podcast, considering that I appeared on yours. And my answer every time was exactly what you said, basically, which is, Ducky is a very, very busy guy. I'm a very, very busy guy. And I don't know, when our paths are going to get a chance to cross. But I'm absolutely delighted that they finally crossed today. And, in fairness to Ducky, I just messaged him out of the blue the other day. And I said, hey, do you want to come on and talk about God and science and atheism? And he was just like, yeah, cool.
I've always time for you and your gorgeous lips, lad.
We won't say everything that we do with my gorgeous lips, lad. We'll leave that for the imagination.
I want a bit of ambiguity there.
Exactly, yeah, absolutely. A bit of innuendo, if you will.
Oh, what they're imagining is worse than what we're thinking, I'm sure.
Yeah, no doubt. The imagination is always the scarier thing. I've always loved that in films, when the filmmaker lets you make up your own mind about what's actually going on, and your imagination tends to do a better job than what any filmmaker could actually put on screen, save for a few exceptions, I think.
Yeah. Didn't they do that with Jaws as well? Granted, there was a limitation with the production, but the less they showed of them, the better the movie ended up.
I couldn't agree more. Jaws is the prime example. Yeah, absolutely. Just the notion that the shark is there and your mind filling in the blanks really just makes it that much scarier. But look, I digress. Ducky, we're here today because I wanted to talk to you about God, religion, science, atheism. What do you believe? I think a lot of your subscribers and my subscribers would love to hear your thoughts, because I know you've addressed it on your channel before, but have you ever gone in depth on your religious views or lack thereof?
Not in depth, no. See, that's kind of the problem with when you're talking about religion or anything like that. It's hard to delve deep into your opinions of them, or at least go any way deeper than just surface level when you're trying to keep things light and, kind of a comedy video. And so I don't tend to go too deep, other than the odd kind of venomous jab I might make at religions in general. But nothing too deep, no.
Sure, yeah, no, so allow me to be the boring one then. No, do you know what? You actually hit the nail on the head, because obviously what you're doing on your channel and what I'm doing on mine are very, very different, let's face it, right? Your channel is, would you be comfortable with the description, something like a comedy-based channel? Would you be comfortable with that description?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're doing comedy, and I'm trying to do. Since we last spoke, my channel has transitioned in a different direction, really. But my channel is very philosophy based. It's about asking those kind of most profound existential questions. Are we alone in the universe? Is there a God? Would it even be a good thing if there were a God? And that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it'll actually be a real treat for your subscribers should they decide to make the jump and have a look at this video. And for my own subscribers, many of whom have been asking, as I've said, for quite some time for this conversation to happen. So if you're up for it, dear listener and viewer, let's dive right in and let's see what Ducky thinks about God, science, religion, atheism, and all the rest of it. So Ducky, let's start with the most simple, but probably one of the most complex questions at the same time. Do you believe in God?
No, not in any sense, really. I was about to say conventional sense, but that wouldn't even be fair to say that. I'm a man of science, and so, science has yet to point me towards a omnipotent being that is controlling over everything. Throughout history. I'm not sure who said it, but it's like throughout history, everything that was mysterious always turned out to be not magic. And so far, it's been the same with God. Everything that science has discovered has always turned out to be not God. So I'm kind of on that train.
Yeah, there's no examples that go the other way. In other words, there's no scientific explanation that was updated to become a religious one.
Yeah, exactly.
All of the examples go in the opposite direction, where we had religious or supernatural explanations for things that were then updated to become scientific explanations. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's it. So like in the Bible where they talk about, heaven is up in the sky, and even in the Quran, doesn't it mention that the sky is a carpet and just stuff hanging off it. But then we went to the sky and there was no God there. It's just been like that throughout history, where we're just constantly disproving different things that have been written by, shit shovelers 2,000 years ago.
Shit.
Well, could you imagine being a scientist nowadays? Could you imagine like some person coming up to you going, well, explain this, as they point into a book written by a fucking moron, eons ago. It'd be like talking to a 2-year-old, people have children and they're like, I can't wait to answer all these questions my kid might have, and show them the wonders of the world. And then they come up and they ask you a question like, what's the name of the center of a speaker? It's just an obscure thing that you're like, oh, fuck, don't ask me that.
I love how your summary of the entirety of the Iron Age and antiquity and the writings that emerged from that period was shit shovelers.
Well, to be fair, there was a lot of shit back then. Let's be fair.
There was a lot of shoveling going on.
There was no plumage going on back then. They had to shovel it everywhere.
Oh,
they scoop it up off the street, shove it into their pocket, take it home with them.
Yes. I mean, I guess what you're talking about, Ducky, to put it in a phrase, and coming from the philosophical angle here, this is often referred to in the literature as the God of the gaps, right? Where religious people insert God into the gaps in our knowledge. So thunder and lightning used to be explained by God's anger, for example, or schizophrenia or somebody having an epileptic seizure or a fit was explained by demons and all this kind of stuff. Science advanced, medicine advanced, and we now understand these as purely naturalistic phenomenon, right? Purely physical phenomena that are understandable through the laws of physics, biology, and chemistry. But what religious people have done and not all religious people, just to be clear, I don't want to be accused of painting everybody with the one brush, but what certain apologists and theologians have done is just every single time we explain something, God then recedes into another gap. So the most recent ones that come to mind are the origin of life, for example. We still don't have a solid scientific understanding about how life emerged, biogenesis. We know how life multiplied and proliferated and changed over time through the theory of evolution, but we don't know where life came from, where that first self-replicating organism came from, or how it started, right? And so people say, oh, simple, God did it. Another example that comes to mind is we don't know what, if anything, caused the Big Bang. And so people say, oh, simple, God did it, right? But in the event that we explain those things, whatever caused the Big Bang, should it be proven that it has an actual causal explanation, people will just say that whatever the cause was, that was then caused by God, right? So God just keeps getting pushed back further and further. That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, just to touch on the point you were saying about the Big Bang, when you talk to some like hardcore religious people, and they give you the kind of fucking, when you say, oh, well, then Big Bang happened and then, the universe as we know it sprung into action. It's just like, well, what's before the Big Bang? And it's like, well, there technically wasn't anything, you can't be 100% sure. And it's like, well, it couldn't have always just been there. And you're like, well, by the same logic, God couldn't have just always been there. It's you're kind of arguing against both of us here.
It's the most textbook special pleading argument I've ever heard in my life. So this is kind of a reference to the cosmological argument, where one of the premises in the cosmological argument is that everything has a cause. But if everything has a cause, the past is infinite, and so argues Aristotle, that's not intuitive, it doesn't make sense. So there must be a first cause, there must be an unmoved mover, there must be a non-contingent entity that resides at the start of everything. And then that's the thing that got everything going. But that thing then is an uncaused thing, which doesn't have a cause. It's an unmoved thing that doesn't have something that comes before it, right? So you're just breaking your own rule. If everything has a cause, but then you're going to insert an exception, why can't the universe itself be the exception?
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. You could, I mean, when I, I'm a teacher, right? So when I present these arguments in the lesson, or in class, students who are only 11 years of age point out these flaws, right?
Yeah, but that's it. Like, it's simple. It's just like, if you want me to play by certain rules, your opinion needs to play by those rules as well.
Yes,
you can't just make up rules. It's like you get like two kids playing, and it's like, I stabbed you, like, messing with a sword fight. It's like, no, you didn't. I have armor now. It's like, no, you can't just keep fucking. You're out. You lost the game and accept it.
Yeah. That's actually a wonderful analogy. I mean, I don't want to just dismiss theology and all of the incredible literature that's been written with, just a simple besmirching of it. And just saying
fantastic stories, to be fair.
Some fantastic stories. Why do I feel like that was another insult?
No, there wasn't. I've recently started going through Stephen Fry's Mythos.
Oh, yes.
Such an amazing book. And it's just hearing the stories is just so good. Yeah. Even though I'm sitting there and I was like, I know it's all bollocks and stuff, it's just so gripping just to listen to it all and then understand all the Greek lore as well. So, yeah.
Well, Greek mythology is fascinating, but it doesn't pose a serious threat to us in society today because almost nobody believes the Greek myths anymore. They are relegated to books like Stephen Fry's, where they are viewed as just the mythology of a civilization that died out a long time ago. My concern is with Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and religions that do actually have some positive and some negative impacts in the world today. But that's why I just wanted to finish the point on theologians. I still think theologians have an important role to play because there are fundamentalist believers who pose a serious threat to our well-being in the world today. And we see the evidence of that in the nightly news. I don't think I need to mention any specific example of terrorist incidents that are religiously motivated, but suffice to say, several come to mind. And you know what I'm talking about, Ducky, and the listeners know what I'm referring to. And so I think theologians play an important role there in terms of updating the theology. And to take Islam, for example, there are fundamentalist Muslims in the world. Of course, I'm not saying that all Muslims are fundamentalists, but those fundamentalist Muslims, I'm not convinced that we have a hope of turning them into atheists. But what we could do with the help of Islamic theologians is perhaps soften the view of radicals such that they become moderates. And so I do think, to be fair to theologians, that they do actually serve an important purpose, even if at the end of the day I'm an atheist and I don't believe any of it. They do have an important role to play, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's something I was thinking there as well, just as you were saying that. There's one thing like Islamic teachings hasn't really done that a lot of other religions have done, is soften with age, kind of move with the times to a degree. Like the Catholic Church's opinion on gay people 200 years ago would have had them hanged, but nowadays it's just like, look, we'll just not address it. This kind of thing. It's gone wicked soft because the opinion of people have changed, so that kind of the religion itself is kind of molding itself to stay relevant in a way. Whereas I don't see as much of that, especially with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yeah,
it's still a bit hardcore, like.
Yeah, there does seem that does seem to be intuitively true. And look, I don't have data sheets in front of me here, but what I will say is this: it would be ridiculous to say that the majority of Muslims are fundamentalists. That would be a very silly claim. Or that the majority of Muslims are terrorists. That would be a very silly claim. And I know you're not saying that. I'm not saying that. Only idiots would say something like that. But there is a very important but here. And this is something that I don't see the left talking about a whole pile. There is no Muslim majority country that I'm aware of where there aren't human rights abuses and where women aren't treated as second-class citizens. And it's not a coincidence that the various holy books and hadith have passages that appear, depending on your interpretation, to justify said behavior. I don't think it's a coincidence that those things happen. I don't think it's a coincidence, for example, that in Saudi Arabia, women are not allowed to leave the home unless they're in the presence of a man. Right? I mean, I don't see that as a coincidence. There are passages in the Quran and in the Hadith which seem to justify the ill treatment of women. Now, I care about people. I'm a liberal, left-leaning person who cares about people's well-being and the well-being of women. I voted in favour of gay marriage when the referendum came up in Ireland, and so on and so forth. I mean, my voting record demonstrates my liberal tendencies. And so when I hear about how women are treated in many, I have to say, Muslim majority countries. And when you look at the polling data, now this data is aged quite a bit, but there's polling data that Pew Research did. Now, Pew, before anybody goes and attacks my source and says that it's an Islamophobic research organization or that it's biased in some shape or form, Pew Research are the gold standard, right? They went into dozens of Muslim majority countries and they asked questions like, should homosexuals be killed? Should women have equal rights? Do you have sympathy for the 9/11 hijackers? And the answers, quite frankly, Ducky, were shocking and appalling. We're not talking about a fringe minority. It wasn't, 5% of Muslims in these countries thought women shouldn't have equal rights. It wasn't, 2% have sympathy for the 9/11 hijackers. The numbers were in the 30th, 40th, 50th, and sometimes the 60th and 70th percentile of support and agreement, depending on which Muslim majority country you were talking about, right? And so I think your comment is... there is truth to the comment. Now, as I said, the data I'm referring to comes from all the way back in something like 2010. So the data is clearly out of date by now. But I guess to your point, Ducky, neither of us are convinced that there's been a significant update in the last 10 years. Even if the data that I read 10 years ago was wrong, or is wrong now rather, let's say it was off by a factor of 50%. That would still mean that, for example, if 40% of Muslims thought women shouldn't have equal rights, that would still mean that there's now 20%, right? So even if it's off now by a factor of 50%, there's still arguably a civilizational problem there where people's attitudes haven't updated to be in alignment with what we would consider to be liberal, dare I say, modern values. And so, yeah, I think I agree with you, Ducky. There's definitely a concern there. I'll put it this way, and I hope nobody would consider me Islamophobic or hateful or bigoted for saying this, but I wouldn't fancy living in Saudi Arabia, and I certainly wouldn't want my fiancée to live there.
No, definitely not, no.
Yeah, it's...
is it Saudi Arabia? It is Saudi Arabia. Women are only recently being permitted to drive.
That's correct. That only happened last year, I believe.
Yeah, which is so backwards when, I know, granted, we have the privilege of speaking from the perspective of a first world country, but that is so backwards.
Yeah. Now, I can hear some of the liberal voices in the audience screaming at us right now, and I remember one of my university lecturers said this to me, because we had this exact conversation. And what she said to me was, but, there are times in Islamic history where the imams and the various Muslim leaders encouraged women to be equal and go out into the world, and the people just did what they were told, right? And so suddenly then there was equality and all the rest of it. But this to me is a sidestepping of the problem, because the key admission there, even by this university professor, is that the people did what they were told because it came from on high. It came from an imam. Right? So I'm not denying that there could be a biased or self-serving imam who might disabuse the Quranic or Hadith text of its original meaning and try and twist it such that it benefits themselves because they have terrestrial goals about serving their own interests, right? I'm not denying that that could happen. But the fact that the majority of the population steps in line is evidence that the majority of the population is still absolutely and utterly hoodwinked by the faith. So it's still a problem. Even if it's the case that elders and authority figures in the religion are disabusing of its original meaning, the fact that the majority in society are willing to go along with it still means that the majority of that society is absolutely steeped in the religion. And that's a problem. That is a problem. If you're so hooked to your religion that you're just going to do whatever your elders say, that's still a civilizational problem that would need to be solved, right? And
yeah,
so
you need more than one good wheel to move a car, you know?
Absolutely.
And when you have one person that's maybe a bit more forgiving and a bit more caring and a more thoughtful leader, that doesn't fix the underlying problem unless, you know, it's carried forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I think, coming back to the theologians' point, this is why I think they're really, really important. So I follow some very important Islamic voices on Twitter. And so I'll just to name a couple, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Majid Nawaz come to mind. Now, I don't agree with Majid Nawaz and Ayan Hirsi Ali and everything. Majid Nawaz, I'm just going to be honest, has been saying some very, in my view, some very silly things about coronavirus recently and vaccination and things. And I think he's been very, very silly. He's one of these people who's screaming about freedom and so on. I don't know what your views are on that, Ducky, and it might well be beyond the scope of this conversation. If viewers are interested in hearing us talk about that, perhaps they could jump into the comments below and we'll have a conversation another time about that. But I just wanted to point out, I don't agree with Majid Nawaz and everything, but Majid Nawaz is a moderate Muslim who encourages peaceful interpretations of the Quran and the Hadith. He's the kind of guy who says that jihad should be interpreted as inner spiritual struggle. And I think that voices like his play a very important role in the modernization, if you will, or in the updating of the Quran, the Hadith, and Muslim attitudes towards them. So yeah, I think they play a very, very important role, and Ayan Hirsi Ali plays a role in that as well, plus many others that we could name. So yeah, I think you're right. For a car to function, you need all the wheels to be going in the same direction, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, with all that said, Ducky, so the short answer is, and I knew we'd go off on a tangent, but what a wonderful tangent it was. So I've asked you, do you believe in God? The short answer is that you don't. Could I just ask you then, segueing on that question, when did you stop, and was your upbringing religious? Or were you raised religious to believe in God? And if so, at what point did you lose your faith, and why did you?
I suppose my upbringing was reasonably religious. Like, the mother used to, you know, he'd have to go to mass every Easter and every Christmas. It wasn't like an every Sunday thing, but it was present. Same with schools, you know yourself, growing up in Ireland, how ingrained Jesus Christ is in the school. Sure, the school I went to was literally named after a saint. They're really not creative with school names here in Ireland. But yeah, so it was certainly present, and you were kind of brought up the thought to definitely believe in it, and there's no other religion but, you know, Catholicism, and that's it, and you need to believe in that. So,
you believed it unquestionably then, Ducky, growing up. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
Well, when I was quite young, all right, yeah. Well, sure, you didn't know anything better, you know. It's kind of you believed everything your elders taught you without question, because they're big, they're tall, they know better. Yeah. But it was about what I think the first inkling, or at least it would have sparked. I remember the first time we were living up in Dublin there in a rough estate with the mother, and I lost a tooth when I was a kid, and I ran into my mother real excited, like, oh, mammy, Tooth Fairy's going to come tonight, I'm going to get £1, you know, happy out. And her being absolutely flat broke and she's not getting paid till the following day, turns to me and goes, oh, the Tooth Fairy doesn't come till Thursdays. That's
a clever ruse.
Yeah. Fucking poor woman was skinned. But that caused a trigger in my head where I was just like, okay, so the Tooth Fairy clearly isn't real, because, you know, I knew Thursday was our payday because it was a big event in the house, essentially, you know, you get crisps and chocolate and whatever else. So I figured that out, and I remember it was a few years later, I basically fell out of the belief of Santa Claus, as so many do at a certain stage when they start hearing rumours and whisperings around them, you know. And said it to me mother, came up to her there one day, and I was like, yeah, I don't believe in Santa Claus anymore. She's like, why not? And I was like, it just doesn't make sense. I was like, if the Tooth Fairy isn't real, why would Santa Claus be real? Why would you pretend one's real and one's not? You know, that kind of way. Yeah. There was a conflict there, so I was like, no, that's obviously bollocks there. And she's like, right, just don't tell your brother.
Immediate concession.
Yeah, and it was maybe about a year or two after that, if even, I was just kind of walking to school one day, and I was just pondering away to myself, as you do in your own head, kind of riddled with the anxiety of, oh shit, I have to go in and try to be popular like everyone. But I was sitting there anyway, just thought popped into my head, it's like, what if God wasn't real as well? And then that thought haunted me for like days and days and days. I'm just like, well, I've never seen him just like Santa Claus. You know, there was never any proof. I've always just been told that he was real, but you know, I've been given as much proof as Santa Claus. If anything, I got more proof for Santa Claus because people would make an effort, you know, leaving cookie crumbs and milk it about the place.
Because people would falsify a scene.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
To actually convince you, yeah.
But and then it's just like I started realizing it must be bollocks. Nobody's able to show me that it's there and it's true. And, you know, that was kind of more the beginning of my kind of favouring of science and stuff like that. But really from that point onwards, I was like, this is clearly all bollocks. People are just deluding themselves. It's like, who started this lie? Nobody got to question them before they died, you know?
Did you ever delve into the philosophical arguments? Did you ever look at the arguments for and against God's existence or research it any further? Or was it simply a case of your faith was shaken and then it ultimately and naturally just kind of evaporated?
I'd say just evaporated naturally in a way, because I've always had a kind of, I suppose, an angry logic about myself in a way. And if it doesn't make sense, I immediately dismiss it. I'm just like, no, that's bollocks. Stop feeding me shite. You know, that kind of way. It's just let me live my life how I want to be. Don't try to force that down my throat that doesn't make sense. You know, don't bullshit me. It's my life philosophy.
So by the time you got to secondary school then, when you were, 12, 13?
It was about first year, yeah.
Yes. Were you still religious at that point? Had you lost your faith at that point?
No, I was pretty much gone at that point, yeah. I remember when I had old Father Bob for our religious class.
Yeah, just for the record here, everybody, Ducky and I went to the same school, but Ducky was, I want to say you were either a year or 2 years ahead of me. Is that right, Ducky?
Would have been 2 years, I'm guessing.
2 years ahead of me, yes. So you and I didn't know each other then. I would have known you to see you. We had a couple of encounters as students in that school, not in the school itself, but I remember I knew you through another person, and we used to get together and play Resistance Fall of Man back in the day on the PlayStation 3. I don't know if you remember that.
I do, yeah. I remember the cardboard divide down the screen. Do you remember that?
In the days when you couldn't do console links and stuff, we would do split screen and put a cardboard sheet down the middle of the television so that we couldn't see each other's screens.
Sheet of cardboard, so there was no screen watching. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. But I remember playing Resistance Fall of Man with you back in the day, and another friend of mine and a friend of yours. We all got together and we would do 2-on-2, and it was absolutely hilarious. But I didn't know you very well though. Despite that, even then you and I were more kind of tangential acquaintances, weren't we? But we did go to that same school. So when you say Father Bob, Ducky is actually referring to a member of staff in the school that we both attended, who was actually a Catholic priest. His name was Father Maloney. I don't know if he's still kicking about or not, Ducky. I don't know if you are.
I'd imagine so. I don't recall hearing anything.
I mean, he was pretty ancient when we were in school. So if he's still alive, fair play to him. But when Ducky refers to Father Bob, he's talking about Father Maloney, who was a priest who actually taught religion classes. So that'll tell you how unbiased the Irish education system was and continues to be.
Listen up, lads. I have no dogs in this fight now, right? But God is the best. Vote for him.
I have no dog in this fight, but Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, and here's what the silly Muslims believe. That is how it was presented, right?
Yeah. No bias at all. Now we're just going to say a little prayer before class begins.
Oh, you couldn't write it. I mean, if you put that in a script, people would say that was shoddy writing.
Oh,
but this was an everyday reality.
This is a bonkers character. Yeah, nobody's going to buy it.
Yeah, no one's going to buy it, and yet that was my school life and your school life, evidently.
But I remember when I had him, the first year I had him, I think it was maybe his second or third year for religion. And I remember the first day I had him and I realised, oh shit, it's a fucking priest teaching this. Like, I was like, I'd be alright kind of like talking shit to a teacher or, you know, talking to a teacher kind of face on, but a priest, you almost feel guilty about admitting that you're an atheist to, you know, that kind of way. Like he's going to try to sell you on something like an old door-to-door salesman or something. But I went into my first class there and I basically at the end of the first class he passed out these prayers. He used to do it at the end of every class. He'd have a prayer on a piece of paper and he'd pass it out there for you to take home and I don't know, throw it in the bin. I don't know what he thought fucking teenagers were going to do with a fucking prayer, but After the first class, I had him. It was the second time I had him. Sorry, yeah. I went up to him and I said, "Listen, I know at the end of every class you're going to be giving out prayers and all that. Just, don't waste the paper on me. I don't believe in all that. Just, just skip me if you can. I don't want to make a scene ranting about it. But, I was trying to be respectful about it,
To be fair, that is fairly... That demonstrates a level of maturity at that point in time that is actually awesome. I mean, I'm a teacher and I deal with young kids every day of the week. And so... yeah, that kind of maturity is rare. And so, I mean, to be fair to you, that was incredibly, just fair. That was fair and mature. And I can only imagine what the response was.
Well, it fell on deaf ears, so...
Of course it did.
Yeah, genuinely, at the end of that class, he parked and smiled at me when he handed it to me. He knew what he was doing.
Fuck.
And yeah, well, at that point then, I just got a bit spiteful, so I literally balled it up in front of him and threw it in the bin away out the door. I mean,
you did the right thing. You were polite and respectful, and you requested that he not do that. And just to address one thing, by the way, because again, I'm always, as you can tell, Ducky, I'm always kind of trying to anticipate objections from the audience, because the last thing I want to do is be perceived as being unfair, because I can already hear some people in the audience saying something like, but you went to that school and it was a Christian school, and so you just have to play ball and get on with it. Well, the problem there, and I've done a full podcast on this if anybody wants to check it out, it's called The Evil of Indoctrination, and so if you want to check that out, you can get a much fuller sense of this problem. But the problem is, in Ireland, 90%, and that's the actual number, by the way, that's not been pulled out of my ass, 90% of the schools are actually run under the patronage of the Catholic Church, which means for most parents, and evidently for Ducky and I, there wasn't actually a non-religious option. And these schools, the 90% that are run by the Catholic Church, are paid for by the taxpayer. So every single person is paying for this, whether you're Christian or not. If you're Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, or a non-believer, you're still paying for this Christian education system out of your pocket through taxation. And then, despite the fact that this education system is being paid for by the taxpayer, the fuckers don't even have the decency to make it so that it is neutral and accessible for all. They hoist upon you a Christian ethic, a Christian indoctrination, and it's despicable. And that example that you just gave of Father Bob, and to be fair to Father Bob, he was actually a very kind, decent human being, but that story does reveal how religion can actually cause otherwise good and decent people to do bad things. What he did there was bad. You politely requested that he not give you a prayer because you don't believe it, and he jammed it in your face anyway and smiled as he did it. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's such a shit thing to do. That's not very, I dare say, that's not very Christ-like, right?
No, that's not very Christian of him at all, yeah.
This is just a very basic separation of church and state issue. If taxation is paying for something, that thing has to be neutral and accessible for all. You can't have something paid for by the taxpayer that prefers one single group and ostracizes or makes other groups feel like they're small or outsiders or something of that nature. Or at the very least, if you do, you also have to make it possible for other religions to be able to have their say as well. And of course, the Irish education system doesn't do any of that. Instead, you get Father Bob shoving prayers in your face and smiling as he does it. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that anecdote.
Well, to be fair, it wouldn't be the worst thing a priest shoved in someone's face.
Yeah, tell me about it. Jesus Christ above. Oh my God. An army of paedophile priests, it seems, at this point.
Yeah. It is
every
bonkers,
continent.
Well, I think your audience will probably agree with me here now as well. What they really need to do is stop making kids so damn sexy.
It reminds me of a Frankie Boyle joke. Frankie Boyle was talking about paedophiles and why do they all have big beards and ugly glasses? He said, what is it about that look that children find so sexy?
Yeah, I remember that.
Leave it to Frankie Boyle to horrify your audience. Christ above. But yeah, I mean, it's just utterly shocking. I mean, the amount of pedophilia globally around the world. You know, the old saying in education was no child left behind. But with the amount of pedophile priests in the Catholic Church, it's more like no child behind left alone. I mean, Christ above. I mean, and do you know what? I just want to be clear here because I don't want to be perceived as being insensitive. I think that it's horrifying what has happened. The reason I laugh is because if I don't laugh, the only other option is for me to burst into tears. I work with children for a living, right? My job, I go to work on a daily basis, and a huge part of my role is looking after children. It's about child protection, child safety, right? And the idea that there are people in the world, religious or otherwise, and just to be clear, nobody is saying that Christianity has caused these priests to be pedophiles. It's probably more the other way around, that, pedophiles gravitate towards that career because they know they're going to be put in authority positions over children, right? It's probably the other way around. But that said, there is an argument to be made that certain tenets of the Catholic faith that there's a causal connection there, namely celibacy. The fact that priests are not allowed to have sex.
Priests suffer the same numbers.
Yeah, the fact that priests aren't allowed. What did you say, Ducky? What was that?
Do Protestants priests become pedophiles at the same percentage as Catholics? I believe Protestants,
that would be very interesting. Yeah, because they're allowed to marry, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
There has to be some level of sexual frustration that plays into it.
There has to be. There absolutely has to be. I mean, my go-to example here, which I think serves as a little test case that actually explains how it might be relevant here, is that certain men, when they're locked up in prison for long enough, despite the fact that they're straight, they will have sex with other men. If they know they're in prison for life, they will have sex with other men. Whereas, of course, Ducky, you don't have to be locked up. You do it on a Tuesday, right?
I do it 30 seconds in, yeah.
Only on Tuesdays, though.
Yeah. I just arrive with a ball gag in my mouth of wood and nothing else.
For those of you who aren't aware, just in case, I can't imagine you won't have heard of Ducky's channel because he's extraordinarily successful, but if you haven't heard of Ducky's channel, there is a running, I want to say it's a running joke, but I'm not so sure anymore. It's a running joke about how it's only okay to be gay on Tuesdays.
Yeah, gay Tuesday. So I live my life for a Tuesday, lad.
But yeah, just to finish the point, if it's the case, and it certainly is, and I think it's undeniable, that there are men who will have sex with other men despite the fact that they are themselves straight out of sexual frustration when they are imprisoned, well, then it just stands to reason that there are going to be priests who, through no fault of their own, can't have sex with anyone. They might be gay or straight, whatever, but they can't have sex with anyone because their religion forbids it, and because of all of that cruel, harsh machinery of guilt and sin, and you're going to burn in hellfire and all the rest of it. It stands to reason that a certain percentage of those individuals, their sexuality, which they're repressing, is going to express itself in unnatural ways. Now, guys, forgive the folk psychology here. I'm not a psychologist. It could be the case that everything I've just said is hot garbage. And if you are a psychologist and you can comment on this and you can enlighten me, I'm the first one who wants to know. Jump into the comments below and correct me, please. But intuitively speaking, in terms of just casual folk psychology, it does stand to reason. It stands up to my intuitive inspection, at least, that you would expect to find a certain percentage of priests who act on it in unnatural ways, which of course results in the paedophilic consequences that we've seen. But yeah, it's grotesque, Ducky, and I don't want anybody to assume that I'm treating it lightly just because we're laughing about it in certain ways. But if I don't laugh about it, I'm just going to cry here. I mean, it's just awful.
Well, you can't deny the humour of it, though. Like, just to say that it's not funny at all, because you got these men of God, people who are supposed to be the best of us,
up
and they're doing the worst things. There's a little bit of comedy in there, like,
absolutely.
That's a character you could write that nobody would believe, that kind of way, if it didn't already exist in the real world.
Yeah,
you're like, this person is supposed to be a king, and he's doing this.
Yeah, moralizing and pontificating from on high, and then as soon as the doors are closed, they're shagging the kids in the back bedroom. I mean, fucking hell, it's just absolutely shocking. But yeah, I mean, I've had lots of encounters with educational professionals in my life, just like you had with Father Bob, where they were just unpleasant and their religion seemed to be playing a primary role in their unpleasantness. I won't recapitulate any of those stories here because I've talked about them in detail elsewhere. Just a few worthy mentions. I remember a teacher sending a friend of mine outside the classroom because he wanted to point out that evolution is a possible alternative to how life proliferated, and not the origin of life, mind you, but how life proliferated and changed over time, as opposed to being just humans just spawning into existence because God created Adam out of the clay and Eve out of his rib. I thought it was a totally fair question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he wasn't the person to come up with that theory. Like, that's been around a while.
Well, you know, the student was totally reasonable in saying, but miss, and it was a miss in this case, but miss, what about evolution? Doesn't that say that we share an evolutionary ancestor with modern chimpanzees? And she sent that student outside the classroom. How dare you? And she sent him outside the classroom, right? So I have a plethora of examples where religiosity has gotten in the way of what could have actually been a profound and insightful moment for that student. That's why, Ducky, I teach in England. That's why I teach in England. I went for numerous jobs in Ireland and I failed at the interview level at every instant because I was asked questions like, how are you going to bring the children to the Lord? And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. And so then you just...
a trolley?
Yeah. And so then you just don't get the job. So yeah, I'm quite happy to be teaching here in the UK. And while Ireland is lovely in many ways, and I hope to return to live in Ireland someday, one thing that Ireland's gotten wrong is the education system. And I have to say, the UK has got it right. It is a largely secular education system where the Father Bobs of the world don't get to jam Jesus down everybody's throat. And, you know, that is progress to me.
Yeah, well, the diversity of the English population simply wouldn't allow for one prominent religion in a school anyway. Whereas, you know, in Ireland, we're not very diverse as a population at all. So, and
true.
Even when we are, it's primarily with other countries that are, you know, like Poland or something. They're already
where they share our religion.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you don't have much pushback in Ireland as of yet, anyway.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely. It's absolutely crazy when you reflect honestly on what's going on in Ireland.
2 hours later.
So, Ducky, at this point, we've spoken about everything from does God exist? What are your beliefs surrounding that? Why don't you find it very convincing? We've spoken about your upbringing, school, what it was like, what Catholic Ireland was all about, and all the rest of it. So I want to transition now, if you'll join me on this journey, if you will, to something a little bit more, perhaps a little bit more somber, a little bit more serious, right? Because we've all lost loved ones. We've all, you know, had grief in our lives. And it's a pretty common assumption, I think, among members of the public that atheism is hopeless, that atheism is no good in times of grief and suffering, and that to be an atheist is essentially to volunteer for a certain amount of existential anxiety, misery, and perhaps even ultimately nihilism. And so I wanted to ask you, a fellow atheist, somebody who doesn't believe in God and somebody who I know has lost loved ones, and I'll leave it to you, Ducky, to what extent you want to talk about loved ones you've lost and trauma in your own life. I don't want to force anything in the conversation. This is deep and personal stuff. But I think the listeners, and to be honest, I myself, I would be just fascinated to know how you, a non-believer, deal with and cope with death and trauma and grief as and when it emerges in your life, as it does in everyone's life.
That's a difficult one to gauge because I don't really think about it, you know, that kind of way.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, see, the thing is, I kind of deal with it how anybody else would, you know, whether you're religious or not. I think people have their own way of dealing with things. They're much more personal, you know, outside of religion. And for me, it's always been a case of, you know, it's, first of all, you have to kind of accept it as an inevitability in life. It's going to happen. You need to expect it. It may still come as a surprise at any given moment, but you know, it's everybody's end game. There's not a person listening to this right now that's going to get out of it alive. But, you know, yeah.
That's the truth. Amen, brother.
Yes, you. Sean, are you listening to me? Somebody out there is called Sean now and they're like, fuck.
Did you just come up with a random name?
I just made me think of Sean the horse. But yeah, no, first of all, it's inevitability, so that's not going to shock you. And second of all is, Yeah, like everybody deals with it their own way. For me, it was always a case of like kind of keeping your head down and kind of, I wouldn't say trying not to think about it because that's not necessarily healthy, but thinking about it in a healthy way and don't let your kind of dark thoughts consume you. Like I'd imagine even the most hardcore religious people will still be with grief over stuff like this. I can't imagine ultimately God's going to bring too much comfort to anybody when a family member has died or a friend very close to him has died. Because that doesn't help you here and now, and that's when it's at its worst. So yeah, I suppose the way I dealt with things was just kind of keeping my head down, trudging on until the worst of the grief was kind of over, and then trying to keep a positive mental attitude about it, be healthy, and just not let the dark thoughts consume you in a way, and try not to get try not to lash back at the world because of it, because I find that's a hole that's very easily slipped down upon when somebody close to you dies. It's very easy to go, fuck this, fuck life, what's the point in everything, we're all going to die, this is miserable, I'm going to have to put up with that more and more as I age. It's very easy to fall down that slope, and you can kind of end up ruining the lives of people around you by falling into that hole as well, which is not fair on anybody. The British stiff upper lip, I suppose, would be how I'd kind of deal with the worst of grief in my way. So yeah.
So in your view, religious people are no better off when it comes to death and grief. You think that we all process it very similarly in your view?
Well, I just think that is so personal. I think like you can imagine that hypothetically, if you died in the morning, I'd grieve for you now whether I was religious or not. The idea of you being in heaven really wouldn't bring me that much peace now. And I think even the most hardcore religious person is going to have like a 10% doubt in the back of their head, and that's going to make the grief even worse,
Yes. I mean, I'm on record on this channel arguing that believing in God might actually be a complicating factor. It might actually make things worse. And I've got numerous examples to demonstrate it. A good friend of mine was killed in a vehicular accident, and I have it on good authority from a person who was at the scene of the accident that when his parents arrived to discover that their child was dead, one of the parents said, and I quote, "I don't know why God put me on this earth at all." And right there, you have somebody dealing with a death, but also dealing with this religious layer that's on top of it, because they're not only struggling with the grief that their child is dead, they're struggling with the grief of why God allowed it.
Yeah, then
right?
What did I do wrong to deserve, having this person die? It's kind of mentality to get into.
It's like an aggravating factor. It actually adds this layer of complication that need not be there. And so, I just... Now, it doesn't always go that way. There might very well be people who, when their loved ones pass away, are like, oh, but it's okay because they're in heaven. I've also on this channel mentioned the passing of my own grandmother, who was essentially a second mother to me, who I love totally and fully to this day, even though she's gone. And I've spoken quite honestly about the fact that I was jealous of my loved ones who seemed to be extrapolating some sense of comfort from their belief that she was in heaven. Now, maybe that, those things they were saying, maybe they weren't true. Maybe internally they were feeling as much pain as I was. I don't know. But even if I just grant for the sake of conversation that they were deriving some comfort from it, fair enough. I'm just pointing out that it could go one way or the other. It might actually be a coin flip. Your religious beliefs could actually hurt you or harm you when it comes to dealing with death. And so if it's a coin flip, you're no better off being religious or an atheist. It might just be the case that it hits people differently depending on who they are, their cultural circumstances, how close they were to the person, and how strong they are as an individual in terms of dealing with grief and trauma, right?
Well, yeah, see, that plays into it an awful lot, because I know my mother, when she was alive, really couldn't handle grief all that well. It hit her more than most, and she got some comfort out of religion. She would kind of go to mass, and she'd pray and stuff like that for dead people. And I remember when I kind of first began, in my younger years, my early 20s, when I was an atheist, I used to always kind of, anytime she'd try to force me to mass at Christmas or Easter, I'd be like, go away, man, none of that shit's real, would you stop with that nonsense? That kind of way as you're kind of rebelling against the world when you kind of dig your heels in with being an atheist. But as time went on, I found that it's actually given her some comfort to a degree, even if she doesn't fully believe it herself. And I have reason to believe she certainly had doubts herself as well. But when somebody passed away, she definitely kind of leaned into it a hell of a lot more. So I got to a point in my life where I'm just like, you know what, it's actually mean for me to try argue against her faith in that regard, when it seems to help a little bit with her dealing with grief. So that was around the time I stopped arguing with my mother about God. I was just like, no, I'm not. If that helps her cope, I'm not going to try to take that away from her.
I have mixed feelings about this point. I have mixed feelings, and I've talked about it at length with various guests on my podcast, including PJ. Shout out to PJ. But yeah, I have mixed feelings on this point, Ducky, because on one hand, you're right. It's totally possible that by arguing with a religious person about their religious convictions, about the afterlife or what have you, it's possible that you might actually cause for them an immense amount of existential anxiety and pain by pulling the carpet from beneath their feet. This cotton wool that they've been wrapped up in their whole life, you're stripping them of it and exposing them to the harsh, cold reality of the purposeless universe, right? And so, yeah, I can see a solid case there. On the flip side, I can also see all the ways in which a religion is harming that person. The things that we just spoke about. Maybe one of the reasons that your mother and others experience the amount of pain and agony they do when somebody passes away is precisely because of their religious beliefs, because they're confronted with the why God, why question. Or, worse still, maybe they're confronted with but did my loved one really go to heaven? Or maybe they went to hell, to take the Christian example, right? So there's all these other questions that might actually cause more pain. And so I do have a debate in my mind, Ducky, about whether or not I should indeed be, quote, liberating people from their religious convictions. But I've got a kind of a middle way solution. And my halfway solution between those two positions is, why don't we just stop teaching people to be religious growing up? Because if you never had it, you'll never miss it. Yeah. I've used the analogy before. Children who aren't raised with a belief in Santa Claus don't wake up on December 25th crying that there's no presents in their living room, because they had no reason to expect that there would be, because they're not steeped in Santa Claus and Father Christmas mythology. And so by the same token, if we were raised with the belief that the universe just is what it is, and when we die, we're gone, and so life is special precisely because it's short, well then we wouldn't miss believing in heaven. We wouldn't miss being wrapped up in cotton wool, because we wouldn't have been wrapped up in cotton wool to begin with. And so, perhaps you're onto something, Ducky, and maybe it is irresponsible, depending on the individual, to take away their religious beliefs, like the decision you made with your mother. And, I fully support that decision. And it sounds like in that case, it was a wise decision. But, it might have been better had your mother not been raised with those beliefs from the word go. That's kind of where my mind has gone on that. How do you feel about that?
There's a bit of truth in that, and the best kind of way I can get my head around it is, when you're an atheist, you don't feel like the world owes you anything. You don't feel like you're destined for greatness. You don't feel like good things should happen to you. The world just plays out how it is. People, there's consequences for their actions, and things happen. So when somebody dies and you're an atheist, you're just like, well, yes, obviously death happens, can happen and will happen to just about anybody on this planet for any wide variety of reasons. There's nobody responsible for it. So you kind of go in with a bit more of a cynical view, but that kind of helps you accept it a lot quicker. Because I see what you're saying.
I wouldn't call it cynical.
There's no omnipotent being to blame. Why did you take him away from me?
Yes.
There's no kind of where did he go, up or down, or there's no kind of fantasy about it. You're kind of seeing the world in all its colours, and there's no filter over it, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. The only word I would swap out is the word cynical, because the word cynical seems to imply that there's an intentionally negative
I kind of meant more like clinical.
Clinical is a good word. I would just use the word skeptical. Right? If you're being skeptical, you're just not willing to believe things on bad evidence. You're just applying good epistemological standards and acknowledging, as you pointed out in the opening, Ducky, that there isn't any evidence for this thing. And now I know there are going to be religious people who are going to scream at their monitor right now and say, there is evidence. Well, if there is, jump into the comments below and share it with me, because if you can prove a God exists, well, then you're going to win a Nobel Prize. because you'd be the first. All of the other arguments for God's existence that have ever been posited fail for various reasons, and we won't get into them now.
Always not magic.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting one, Ducky, but it's wonderful to hear about your experiences and how you've dealt with it. And, you know, I must say my experiences are very similar. I just kind of get on with it. So as I mentioned, when my grandmother passed away, who was a second mother to me, I just accepted it, kind of like the circle of life. I just, you know, I came to the conclusion my grandmother lived a wonderful life filled with love and care and attention, surrounded by her children, of which she had 8 or 9, because families were just massive then. Yeah. And she loved her children totally, fully, gave them the best upbringing she could give them. And one of them turned into my mother, who is an amazing person. And in some ways, my grandmother lives on in the metaphorical spirit of my very own mother. And so, yeah, I mean, I just came to the conclusion that she had a wonderful life and it was her time and she's gone now. And that's okay. She's not in pain anymore. She's gone. She doesn't exist. Non-existence is not a problem. I don't know about you, Ducky, but I wasn't worrying about anything in the medieval period. Were you?
No, of course not.
No.
Yeah,
and I'm probably not going to be worrying about anything in 1,000 years' time.
Yeah, the best description I heard of it was, because there's a popular argument with religious people, is it's like, well, where'd you go when you die? You have to go somewhere. And the best counter I ever heard of that was like, well, where does a flame go when you blow out a candle? It just,
that's a good analogy.
Ceases to be. But definitely on that point, that's something that got me through. I remember so coming up on this time January there, when me dog Snoop died. And one of the things that helped me kind of cope with that, and there was something weird about there was something with Snoop was almost worse than my mother, you know, forgive me for saying it, but I had to be there when she was getting put to sleep and stuff, which, you know, kind of
Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
no, I know exactly what you mean when you said worse there. Yeah.
But the thing that got me through that the most was she was a very old dog, and there was very little that could have been done in her entire life to make her live longer. You know, It was nature would not allow her to live much longer than that. So that was one thing that kind of got me through that, was just like I gave her the best and longest life I could possibly give her. And, you know, it's a good way to make your peace with that.
Ducky, knowing you personally as I do, having been a welcome guest in your home on many an occasion, I, for one, can say that the dogs in your home are treated like bloody kings. And I have to say, Snoop was an absolutely adorable dog. And you know what? You're spot on. You gave that dog an amazing life. And I think you're right. I think there is comfort in that. And it's, you know, I don't want to be perceived as being kind of irresponsible in my comparison here, but I said more or less the same thing about my own grandmother. She had an amazing life. And it's okay that amazing lives come to an end. And in fact, the fact that they do come to an end is what makes those lives all the more amazing and all the more special and all the more precious. You see, this is my thinking, and it's true with Snoop, it's true with your mother, it's true with my grandmother, and it's true of every other life that has ended. Part of what makes life special, in my view at least as an atheist, is that it is short. I'm firmly convinced, Ducky, that if indeed there is a heaven, that would just simply devalue this life. If there's a forever after, the great big gig in the sky, the party that never ends after we die, we get 80 or 90 years here, and then where our soul goes to the hereafter and it's all just bliss from then on, well then this life is, you know, it is just a waiting room. What's 80 years compared to eternity, you know?
Yeah. And the thing that always bothered me about this, that whole, you know, heaven or hell thing was, why don't we just, you know, be born in heaven and just get kicked out when we're bad, like an old nightclub bouncer, you know, come along and just say, no, off to hell with you now, you've been bowled. Like, why?
Because God is punishing us all. Because God is punishing us all, Ducky. That is the theological justification. Adam and Eve fucked up in the Garden of Eden, and so now we are all born, and Adam is seminally present in all of us. That is the argument, that we are all born with that stain of original sin, and we must prove ourselves to be welcomed back into the garden and to sit at the right hand of the Father. It's despicable.
We're at fault despite the fact that he left the snake into his fucking garden.
Yeah, it's despicable. It's absolutely despicable. It doesn't... it doesn't work morally at all. It's generational guilt, an idea which I profoundly and sincerely reject. The idea that I should be responsible for the sins of my forefathers is absolutely despicable.
Yeah, that's bonkers.
And so,
and it's starting a religion on the back foot as well. Like your default setting is guilt. You know, you can't be a good person because you're always guilty of something. You know, they're going to get you with the well, your ancestors ate the apple. Yeah. It's like, well, fuck off. I can never win that then.
Yeah, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke. It's incredibly unethical. And I have to say...
Do you know what it's like? It's like a bouncer at the door of a nightclub. And do you ever get that when you walk up and they're like, oh no, we're full, not tonight?
Yeah.
Like, it feels like that. If God just doesn't like you, he'd be like, oh no, but the apple, go on away.
Well, to be honest, it's like going up to the bouncer and the bouncer saying, your father used to act the bollocks in here, and so now you're not allowed in. Right.
Your father nicked a bottle of cider.
Yeah, exactly. Your father nicked a bottle of cider here about 10 years ago, so now you can't come in. Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, and I really have to hold Christians' feet to the fire on this. I think it is utterly despicable to say that an innocent, beautiful baby is sinful, or is born with the stain of original sin. I think that is an absolutely wicked and disgusting doctrine, and yet that is one doctrine. I won't say that every Christian denomination holds to that doctrine in the same way, but a significant number of Christians in the world believe in the doctrine of original sin, and that an innocent little baby without any hatred in its heart is born with the stain of original sin. And I'm sorry, anybody who sincerely believes that, just fucking fuck off. like that is just such a joke. I mean, come on.
Yeah. It's a cop out.
Yeah.
You know, another one of these fucking make believe nonsense things to fill the gaps. You know, to kind of, you know, to explain why there's bad in an unforgiving world. But because people's fault, not God. You know, God can't be bad.
And more to the point, a doctrine which has caused immense suffering and grief in the world, because goodness knows that there are millions of examples throughout history of babies dying before they were baptized. The mothers and fathers of whom, if indeed they were Christian, experienced very real dread and immense suffering because they then believed that because their child wasn't baptized and the original sin removed, their child has now either been banished to purgatory and or hell.
Yeah.
I mean, these doctrines don't just exist in a vacuum. I mean, I'd love if everybody treated their religion like many Christians I meet, where it's just a kind of an irrelevancy in their life. Oh yeah, sure, you know, there might be a God or whatever, and yeah, sure, I was baptized and I had me Holy Communion and whatever, right?
Yeah, kind of take the values of it.
Yeah, I mean, I wish everybody was casual like that, but the unfortunate truth is not everybody is that way. There are those parents who go to bed every night screaming in terror and agony and waking up with beads of sweat in their forehead, thinking about their child who may very well be burning in hell because they didn't have their original sin removed. I mean, even leaving aside the baptism issue, there's a branch of psychiatry that has been birthed in the United States called fear of hell psychiatry, where people literally have to be counseled and go through psychotherapy because of their paralyzing fear of hell, even though they no longer believe in it. Because the indoctrination runs so deep that their fight or flight response keeps kicking back an error signal, which is giving them panic attacks and depression because their fear of hell is so palpable. Crazy. I mean, yeah, it's just unbelievable. I count myself very lucky that I escaped all of it, because I used to be very, very, very Christian. You didn't, I mean, we had, like I said, we had a number of encounters as younger men and kids playing PlayStation, but we never got into philosophical discussions. But at that time in my life, I was very, very Christian. I was borderline creationist in my beliefs, Ducky. I used to go around and try to convince people of the existence of Jesus Christ, and I had all the arguments for existence off by heart.
Yeah, so. But you're entitled to be a bit of a fool when you're younger. That's kind of part and parcel to it. I remember like half my mates when I was like 14 and 15 like wanted death to gay people.
Oh my
And-
God.
Yeah, like just couldn't stand gay people. Like, and I was just like, and even back then it was reasonably accepted. You know, that kind of way. It wasn't.
Yes.
It was only like 15, 17, 18 years ago, tops. And there's people like that. And then as they've got older and, you know, got into their 20s and stuff like that, and you say to them, it's like, do you remember how much you used to hate gay people? And they're like, what? No, I never hated gay people. And you're like, oh, you fucking did. You know, it's so absurd to them now.
You know, they're just
opinion has
lucky they
changed.
weren't raised in the social media generation where everything is immortalized online, you know?
Yeah, well, sure, that's how it's gone nowadays. You can't have ever had an opinion online anymore. But
Yeah.
sure, as Dave Chappelle says himself, he's just like, you know, Twitter is not a real place. Who gives a fuck?
Yeah, I watched that most recent special. It was actually, I didn't get all the controversy, to be honest, but
No, I didn't get it at all. I thought he handled that with a lot of fucking tact and decorum.
yeah. I had a bit of a laugh watching it, and so I just moved on with my life.
Yeah.
You could get lost on Twitter reading all of the supposed controversies. There's a controversy about everything now, isn't there?
Oh yeah, well, sure, fucking people are bored sitting at home, and then you have this place where you can go to where people will reinforce what you already think. It's not like it's not as brutal as the real world where you can get an opinion, walk outside the door and shout it, and somebody immediately calls you a stupid bastard. That doesn't happen online because you can go straight into a group that already believes the thing you believe, so you don't get challenged.
Echo chambers. So yeah, you know, this is a perfect segue because that's exactly what's going on in these religious communities as well, right? If you live in a community of people and are constantly reinforced in your belief system and structures by people who agree with you, then you're never going to question it. You're never going to think outside the box. And your story about how you lost your faith kind of resembles that in a way. So you were in a religious echo chamber, you went to religious schools, you had a religious parent, and it wasn't until you yourself discovered that there were maybe some flaws in this that the kind of echo chamber was shattered in your mind and you began to realize, oh, there might actually be another side to this. My favorite example, which we've discussed before, but it bears sharing here, and I love sharing this example, is the story of PJ. PJ rather infamously said to me, and it's immortalized in one of my podcasts, but he pointed out that he was at a funeral of a loved one's. So they're all sitting around and the wake is going on and all that business. The body is laid out and people are, you know, sympathizing and all the rest of it. And an uncle or something of that nature said under his breath, I don't believe in any of this at all. And PJ just kind of like perked up and was like, oh, what? You can question this?
Yeah.
And he was an atheist by the end of the day, he says.
Yeah. That's how simple it can be. Like, you know, just
the echo chamber, like, just destroyed in one fell swoop.
We had this lad in our class in primary school who joined Indian chap named Ronocht, and the second he came into the class, we were all fascinated by him. First of all, he was black, which was like unheard of back then. Like, you know, it was so rare to see a black person in Ireland back then.
Yeah, for sure.
And second of all, he was Hindu, I believe.
Yep.
Is that the religion of India? I'm not 100% sure.
That is the primary faith of India, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I was like, what, you don't believe in God? And he's like, no, well, my God. And I'm like, huh? Oh, what is this witch you brought into this classroom?
Yeah. I love that, though. I absolutely love that. And again, a moment like that can be transformative. As soon as you realize that there are all these other religions and that they can't all be right, but they could all be wrong.
Yeah, it starts neurons firing, you know?
It absolutely does. Well, for some people, we have to remember we're still living in a world where it's something ridiculous like 80 to 90% of the planet still identifies with some faith. Now, no doubt there's a certain percentage, a subsection of that majority that are just baptized and don't really believe it, but they still get ticked as the Christian box simply because they're baptized. I know people who are atheists who still tick the Christian box on a census form because, oh, sure, I was baptized Christian, so I have to tick that box. No, the census asks you to fill in what you actually believe. You should be ticking non-believer, atheist, or agnostic. Right? You're not meant to be ticking what you were baptized.
But that's fair
as.
enough. I remember, like, when I was a teenager and you know, as mother was getting me to go to church and all that. And I'm just like, how do I sign off this? What's the procedure to stop being Catholic? You know, it's like, is there a form I have to fill out? Do I have to go tell a priest? How does this work? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not something you'd think about. Like, you know, obviously
there is actually a process, and
I know, but it was then you can't get buried in a Catholic church or something like that.
That's
then,
right. Yeah, they punish you. They won't allow your body to be buried on church grounds and all that kind of stuff. I've never personally went and had my Catholicism rescinded, but I mean,
well, see, if
I don't.
If it make people's lives easier when I'm dead, just to keep it on paper as that's fine. I won't have the ability to give a shit when I'm dead anyway. So, you know, ultimately it's about damage control at that point.
Yeah, you know what? I've softened on this because at one point in time I was like, if my body is buried in a Catholic graveyard, I'll turn in my grave and bloody, I'll come back and I'll haunt you. Or, you know, I used to be very, very strident about that, but I've softened, and you know what? I think I more or less agree with you. I'll be dead. I won't know anything about it. I don't give a fuck if they just fuck me into a mass grave. I don't give a shit. Feed me to the worms. You know what? I might donate my body to science. I might tick the form that says, I don't even care if it's a first-year medical student who fails an exam while performing an experiment on my colon. I don't give a shit. If I could be of some use...
Yeah, might as well put this body in front of another pair of eyes, give them the privilege of it. You know,
if they want to turn me into feed for horses, if I serve some function in death, then so be it. But yeah, look, I don't care.
My mother used to be horrified when I told her that when I die, I'm going to donate every part of me to whoever fucking needs it.
Yeah.
She's like, what? Really? And I was like, yeah, fucking eyeballs the whole lot. I don't care if I'm nothing but literally a sleeping bag full of stitches in my coffin.
I think it's a wonderful idea. I think it's an absolutely wonderful idea. In a world where we have waiting lists, where people are waiting for organs and so on, and assuming you die and your organs are in good enough condition that they can be harvested, I think it's a wonderful idea. Yeah. A cousin of mine died of meningitis, and he went to bed one night, basically. He said to his mother that he had a pain in his back, and he went to bed. And she said, don't worry, son, you'll be all right in the morning. Just go to bed. You've had a long day. And he didn't make it to the morning. When they went in the morning, his eyes were white in his head and he was unresponsive. So they rushed him to the hospital. The brain had swelled to the size of a football in his skull overnight. So he wasn't dead just yet, but the brain was dead. So brain dead is dead. They put him on a life support machine until the scans came back, which verified that he was in fact gone. But the organs were still in a harvestable condition, and so that's what his mother, to her credit, my aunt, she decided to donate his body so that his organs could save some lives, and they did.
Yeah, and I genuinely think that should be like a law, something you have to opt out of rather than opt into.
You know what? I 100% agree. I 100% agree. And here we are, two atheists talking about helping our fellow man. This doesn't have anything to do with God. It doesn't have anything to do with religion. And yet, I fully agree with you right now.
Yeah, well, I think that is a wonderful thing to do. Being a good person.
Say again?
So religion didn't invent being a good person, you know, and actually giving a shit about people. They certainly adopted. They adopted kind of guides on how to behave in life, all right, and then sold them off as their own creations. But being a good person's been around for as long as there's been people.
I couldn't agree more. We wouldn't have gotten this far if we didn't have social norms and rules. The human species couldn't have survived if we thought that murder and theft were permissible, because we would have all just killed each other.
We're a tribal species, so like cooperation and, you know, kind of that kind of social norms would have been part of our evolution.
Absolutely. And you know what? I couldn't agree more. I'm firmly convinced, albeit I don't think I can prove it. I just think it stands up, again, in terms of intuition, that morality is clearly an evolutionary offshoot. Right? Of course, it's not an accident that that even children, very young children, tend to agree that you shouldn't don't take Tommy's stuff. Don't punch Tommy in the face. It's not an accident that we all, regardless of culture, I might add. Now, there are differences. There is grey. Cultures come to different conclusions, as we were discussing in the opening about Islam. Islamic culture comes to different conclusions about the place of women in society versus the West, sure. But those still aren't societies where they go around willy-nilly killing each other. Yeah. Again, there are certain fundamentals that we all agree upon because of our evolutionary origin, and because, as you quite rightly pointed out, we are a social species, and the only way that a social species can survive is through cooperation and looking after one another.
Yeah, a level of empathy. Because, like, One of the things, and it's so basic, but people always associate these kind of things with commandments or something like that about being a good person. But if you don't like something being done to you, you're less likely to do it to somebody else because you know how that would feel to you. So you empathize with their situation, yeah.
The golden rule. And it does not originate with Jesus, folks. You can find the golden rule in the Analects of Confucius, which predate Christianity by 1,000 years. So spare me. I tell you, I'm so sick of the Christian Brigade asserting, and that's all it is an assertion, asserting that Christianity is the be-all and end-all and the origin of morality, and that without the Christian faith, we would just be doomed. Now, I'm not going to deny that Jesus Christ sounds like he was, generally speaking, had some good ideas, but to be fair, he also had some pretty crappy ideas. I have a video on my channel about Jesus not being the best role model. Jesus had some good advice, but he also had some pretty crap advice. So Jesus isn't some moral pinnacle that we should all be looking to. He had some good ideas and he had some bad ideas. And in my view, we should take the good and scrap the bad.
I read something before, and it sounds like it could be true, so it probably is, but the fact that Jesus might have never existed to begin with, not even a person named Jesus, and the earliest recorded story in the Bible was written maybe 250 years after his supposed death.
So what you're articulating there, Ducky, is what's known as the mythicist position. There are scholars and historians who say that there's not enough evidence to suggest that Christ ever even existed to begin with. It is a debate. I think there's good enough evidence to say that Christ probably did exist, but I just don't even think it's relevant. New York exists and we can prove it, but that doesn't mean Spider-Man is real. So yeah, even if there was some guy called Jesus wandering about the desert 2,000 years ago, that doesn't mean that his miracles were real, and it doesn't mean that his preachings are true. So to be honest, it's kind of beside the point. But in terms of the oral tradition becoming a written tradition, I think the earliest texts were actually written down about 40 years after Christ's death. But even then, 40 years. If I told you something right now, let's say we went off air and I told you something right now, and neither of us wrote that down until 40 years later, what are the odds that we would transcribe it exactly? No, I mean seriously.
Well, as they call it, monkey whispers, it would just be completely, it wouldn't even be on the same topic.
Exactly right.
Down.
Yeah,
would just make something up at that point.
Much of the Christian tradition was oral for 40 or so years, and then the people who were following Christ's teachings realized at a certain point, oh shit, if we don't write this down, we're all going to be dead and it's not going to survive. So they started writing it down about, I think the earliest estimates are, the smallest estimates are around 35 to 40 years after Christ's death, they started writing it down. But there are no original texts. We have no original texts. What we have are copies of translations without any originals. And so, yeah, it's a who's who of a guess. But coming back to the key point, I don't think religion is the arbiter or the origin of morality. Don't get me wrong, I think Christianity was quite useful in spreading certain ideas like the golden rule, but it certainly wasn't the progenitor of that idea.
No, I don't think we can
find it in any and all civilizations that predate Christianity by quite some time.
Yeah, I don't think humans as a species would have been able to build cities and communities without that, and cities and communities predate Jesus by a long stretch.
Ducky, you can identify rudimentary moral codes in chimps, who are our nearest cousin. We share a modern ancestor with chimps. And there are studies that have been done. I can't cite them directly, but if any of the listeners are interested, jump into the comments below and ask me and I'll give you a citation. But there are studies that have been done on fairness ethics, where if you give chimps, a collection of chimps, food, and they divide it amongst themselves, if one chimp takes more than some of the other chimps, they ostracize that chimp and sometimes kill that chimp. So right there, in chimpanzees of all creatures, with whom we share 99% of our DNA, you can see a rudimentary fairness ethic where if one chimp takes too much, they're ostracized and punished and in some cases killed. And so, yeah, I mean, if you can identify rudimentary moral codes in chimps, who is anyone to say that religion is the progenitor of all of this? Now, unless you're claiming that God is the one who writes it on our hearts. Yeah, prove it, motherfucker. You can allege that God wrote it on my heart, but prove God.
Come on. You're filling gaps again.
Yeah, exactly. Where does morality come from? Well, we don't know for sure, so God must have done it. You're filling gaps again. That's such a good way of putting it.
Yes, stop filling gaps, for fuck's sake. Get a job as a plasterer.
Absolutely, yeah. We should hire them for the council. Plenty of gaps on the roads around these parts. They're so good at filling gaps.
Fuck you.
Was that you, God?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Shit about me, Dara. I don't like it.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a first for the Magician's Thoughts podcast. Coming here right now, joining us live from heaven, it is God.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? Haven't been to Earth in about 2,000 years, where I arrived as weirdly enough, a magician.
Can I ask you, God? Can I ask you one last question for God before I talk to Ducky again?
Yes.
Which of the world's religions most accurately reflect your will?
Pastafarian.
Yeah, man. Rastafarian. That was a great answer. Well done. I gotta get me a soundboard.
That's too much fun, lad. I annoy people so much with it. It's great. It's like my second favourite thing to do. First one is make people laugh. Second one is annoy people.
Well, you made me laugh there. I nearly fucking choked to death when you fucking did that randomly. Can I ask you one last question? Because I'm painfully aware that we're coming to the end of our time here, and I don't want to be too kind of domineering in terms of taking your time, Ducky. You are a busy bee or a busy ducky.
A busy ducko, yeah.
Yeah, so let me ask you, in closing here, I thought this would be a nice question to finish on. Let's see where we get with it. If you could wish it, if you could click your fingers right now to make it all true, there is a heaven, there is a God, when we die, we're going to see our loved ones again, all of it is true. Would you want that? If you could click your fingers and it were all true, would you want it to be?
I suppose part of me would, you'd like to see your loved ones again. That's definitely a factor. You'd play into that, of course you would. But I think it would be a terrible idea to make that so. Because one of my biggest hatreds of religion is the idea that heaven is your reward for being a good person. I said, why are you really a good person if you have to be rewarded for it? If you're only being nice, so good, so you're rewarded heavily at the end of it and you get to go to heaven and all that. It's like, if that incentive wasn't there, would you still be a nice person? Would you still have general empathy and sympathy for other people? I don't like that at all. It feels, it's dishonest, It's
yes.
It's not behaving as you naturally would, and there's just so much dishonesty with that. So I never liked that. And then the idea of a place you go after life just for me devalues the whole idea of life itself.
I couldn't agree more.
It takes away, like, there's such a tiny, infinitely small chance that you ever exist to begin with. And, you can't, if you made heaven real, that would take how special that is away and utterly render it pointless. How could anybody live with themselves? Everybody be suicidal in the morning. If that wasn't against the Bible or whatever else, we just pay people to top us so we can go to heaven and fast track it, like, speed run life. But yeah, no, I wouldn't like that at all. It would bring less meaning to the world, not more, in my opinion.
You know what? I largely agree with you. And I think that actually makes the pair of us, Ducky. I think that makes the pair of us. I think we're more than just atheists. I think we're more accurately described as anti-theists. Not only do we not believe it, but both of us seem to be quite happy that there isn't a shred of evidence for it. We're actually quite happy that it isn't true. And I will piggyback on those. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think if there were a heaven, and I'm quite happy that there's no evidence for one, despite the fact, yeah, sure, I'd love to see my loved ones again. But yeah, I think if there were a heaven, it does in fact devalue this life. I think you're spot on. And on your incentivized morality point, oh my God, we are in violent agreement. I think a good person is defined by what they do despite incentives. I'll go to a teaching example. Why not? I have students in my classes who do what they're told because they know that doing well is its own reward. I have other students who will only pick up a pen and do a tap if they're promised some kind of reward, like an achievement point, which is an online database in our system, or, can we leave early for break time, and then I'll do my work. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think a moral person is a person who does the right thing regardless of the incentives. There might even be incentives against doing the thing that they're about to do. Doing action X might actually hurt them, but they do it anyway.
Yeah, get a self-satisfaction out of it, even if it's like volunteer work or giving money to charity, stuff like that. It's, if that's who you were, that's somebody I want to know. But if you're only doing it because you think God will look on you favorably, that's incredibly dishonest, and I don't like that. Yeah,
I don't like it either. And it would be remiss of me not to mention Christopher Hitchens here, who was another infamous anti-theist. But Christopher Hitchens said that he's quite happy it's not true, because he viewed it more or less as the essence of totalitarianism. He said, this God, if indeed this God is real, is unalterable, unchangeable, unelected, and yet stands in judgment and power over all of us with impunity. That is a terrifying idea. Honestly, that is terrifying.
Yeah, who the fuck are you to judge me and what I did to my life? Why are you the ruler in which all is measured by?
Yeah.
And it's just stuff like that. I don't feel lost by not having a religion or anything like that, because you'd have people who are just like, well, if you don't believe in it, what's the point? This, that, and the other. I say, because the universe fascinates me more so than any religious text, or, even the reason for why we're here. It pales in comparison to like how the fucking universe works. Nebulas, galaxies, all these things. You look up to the sky and there's 1,000 questions, millions of questions that need answering there that are way more interesting to me than what somebody wrote down in the book a few thousand years ago.
Oh my God. This is such a great place to bring the conversation to a close. In other words, Ducky, reading about black holes and galaxies that are light years away, stars in the night sky that are so far away that the sun from which the light is emanating probably doesn't exist anymore, and we're just looking at the historical light that's still traveling to us. That is far more profound, far more beautiful, and far more meaningful than the burning fucking bush.
Yeah, I don't want...
And the talking snake and the Jew that got nailed to a cross.
Yeah, I don't want to know about the giant man that sits in the sky and judges the human race. I want to know how well the human race is going to do in the future, how much we'll discover, how ultimately amazing we're going to be as a species going forward with just, the intelligence that we've had and the stuff we discovered about this weird place we found ourselves to be today. And I want to see how that goes. That's my biggest fear in death. My biggest fear of death is dying never knowing a fraction of the mysteries of the universe.
Oh my God. You know what? On that note, we are in violent agreement yet again, but on that note, I can't think of a better place to conclude the conversation. Here, my friend. Fucking hell. This got profound really fast.
Yeah.
The profoundo-meter just went up to 11. Oh man, I love it. I absolutely love it. No, Ducky, I have to say, I had no expectation about how this conversation would go. I didn't know whether it would be rousing success or dull, boring, whatever. I had no expectations whatsoever, because I know that you're not interested in philosophy as much as I am, say. My whole channel is based around philosophy, right? But this conversation has been amazing. I've just really, really loved it. And we have to have another one of these again, because you're actually so knowledgeable on all of this stuff, and you're a philosopher as well, evidently. So you're not only a comedian and crushing it in the comedy domain, but you're also a fucking brilliant philosopher. Is there anything you're not good at?
Oh God, I really am fantastic, aren't I?
You really fucking are. And you've got the YouTube thing sorted out as well, you fucker. So No, man, I have to say this has been great. And look, I hope the listeners got something out of this. Guys, if you enjoyed the conversation, obviously I'd really, really appreciate it if you hit that like button. But more to the point, jump into the comments below and let's continue the conversation there. Ducky and I have talked about a lot of stuff in this conversation, and some of it is probably pretty controversial. No doubt. And so if you disagree with either of us, jump into the comments below and let us know why. Alternatively, if you agree, I want to know why. I want to know what you think. Let's hash it out below. Other than that, if this is your first visit to the channel, I'd sincerely appreciate if you subscribed. And of course, if you want to go over to Ducky's channel, which I highly recommend, although I imagine the vast majority of viewers who are watching this will have seen Ducky's channel before. But in the unlikely event that you don't know who Ducky is or you haven't seen his channel before, the link to that channel will of course be in the description below, and I couldn't encourage you more. And by the way, Ducky's got two channels. It's the first channel is just called Sgt Ducky, Sergeant spelled SGT. The other channel is called Ducky's Room, and the link to both of those will be in the description below, and so I would highly encourage you to check those out. Ducky, thank you again for joining me here today.
No problem, lad. An absolute pleasure to be here and conversate on a bit more of an intellectual topic than what I usually do. So it's been great crack.
Yeah, and man, I mean, I don't know, you crushed it. I loved this, and we absolutely have to do this again. I'm going to
do it over on mine. So next.
Yeah, no, that would be fantastic. Yeah, I would absolutely love to do that. That would be great. That's a date. But other than that, guys, again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks again to Ducky for being so gracious with his time and joining me here today. And I hope to see you all in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye, God.